I never expected to notice the silence first, the way it wrapped around us like it had been waiting. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, feels aware. I was standing in her kitchen, pretending to study the crack in one of the tiles when she brushed past me to reach the sink. Not close enough to be obvious, close enough to register. Her sleeve grazed my wrist. A nothing touch. The kind people forget immediately. Except I didn't. She smelled faintly of something. Warm, not perfume. More like clean skin and sunlight that had settled and stayed. She was in her mid-40s, though nothing about her moved like someone trying to hold on to youth. She carried herself with a calm that made the room adjust to her pace. Confident. Yes, but not armored. There were pauses in her movements, moments where she seemed to hesitate. Like she was listening to a thought she hadn't decided to trust yet. "Sorry," she said automatically. Her voice was low, steady. "Used to being heard." "It's fine," I replied too quickly, then slower, as if correcting myself. "Really?" She smiled without turning around. A small curve of the mouth, not inviting, not closed off, just there, her husband had been away for weeks. She mentioned it once, the way people mention the weather as information, not confession. I hadn't asked where he was. I hadn't asked when he'd be back. Still, the absence hung in the room like an extra chair pulled slightly away from the table. I watched her hands as she poured coffee, careful, unrushed. One ring caught the light when she tilted the pot. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I looked away. I was in my 20s. Too young to pretend this was nothing. Old enough to know better than to label it something dangerous. She handed me a mug. Our fingers met again, this time longer. Not because either of us tried to hold on, but because neither of us pulled away fast enough. Her eyes lifted to mine. There it was. Not flirtation. Not innocence. Something quieter. A look that said, "I see you noticing." A look that asked nothing and still felt like a question. The coffee was too hot. Kai didn't let go. She didn't either. "I should," she began, then stopped. Her thumb shifted against the handle, pressing briefly into my skin. A micro-adjustment. A tell. "Yeah," I said, though I didn't know what I was agreeing to. We stood like that for a beat too long. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed, tires hissing over pavement. Ordinary sounds stretched thin by awareness. She finally stepped back first. Not abruptly, deliberately, as if she needed the space and was annoyed that she did. "You can sit," she said, nodding toward the small table by the window. "If you want." "If I want." I sat. She leaned against the counter instead of joining me. Distance restored, but not erased. She folded her arms, then unfolded them again. Her gaze flicked toward me and away. Like she was checking the temperature of something she didn't want to name. "You're quiet," she said. "I've been told that," I replied. Then, after a pause, "You don't seem bothered by it." She smiled again, softer this time. "Some people feel silence because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." "And you?" "I listen," she said. Then, almost under her breath, "Sometimes too much." The light through the window caught the fine lines near her eyes. Not hidden, not apologized for. They made her look real, present, like someone who had lived with intention and consequence. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't sudden. It had been building quietly the way instincts do before you admit they're guiding you. Something animal, not wild, just honest. A sound. Cut through the moment. Keys. The unmistakable click of a lock turning. Her head snapped toward the door. Mine followed. For a second, neither of us moved. And in that suspended breath before the door opened, she looked back at me. Eyes steady, unreadable, and said nothing at all. The sound of the keys faded, but the tension they left behind didn't. I watched her straighten, smoothing her blouse with deliberate care, as if she could iron out the moment just past. I wanted to tell myself I'd imagined the way her hand hovered near mine for an extra heartbeat just before she turned away. But I hadn't. She had lived in this neighborhood for years. I hadn't. Most days, I was just the young guy who delivered groceries. But somehow, in these small shared moments, I felt like the only one who noticed her fully. The way the sunlight caught the faint streak of gray at her temples. The softness around her jaw, the way her voice could quiet a room without raising volume. I used to have a cat, Uko, she said, almost to herself. I looked up, surprised. Not here. Somewhere else before. Her hand pressed briefly to the counter, then dropped. I didn't ask. She didn't elaborate. But I understood the pause. A history of leaving, losing, or being left behind. I swallowed, noticing how her proximity made the air warmer. She shifted, leaned slightly toward me, then pulled back as if measuring the distance between curiosity and propriety. My hand twitched. I wanted to reach to brush against hers again. Small, meaningless contact that would mean everything. She looked at me sideways, catching my glance. The flicker of recognition was dangerous. The age difference hovered silently, like a line drawn in sand neither of us wanted to cross. Not yet her husband, her life, the quiet judgment of the world. None of it spoken, all of it felt. You're very observant, she said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes lingered, tracing a path over me that made my chest tighten, and then she smiled faintly. A smile that was both acknowledgement and warning. I noticed things, I murmured, voice lower than intended. Her perfume, subtle and warm, filled the space between us. My hand itched to brush a strand of hair from her face. Not because I was bold, because it felt necessary, like completing some unfinished sentence the room had started. We talked then, in fragments, each word carefully weighed. About books, about coffee, about clouds drifting lazily across the sky. And still, every conversation was punctuated by silence. Pauses that hummed with something we weren't naming. At one point, she reached for the sugar jar. Her hand brushed mine. Longer this time, neither of us pulled away. The brief contact sent a ripple through me. She froze for a fraction of a second, eyes dropping to our hands. Then slowly, deliberately, she lifted hers, letting her fingers linger along the edge of mine before retreating. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. But it was acknowledgement. Recognition that we were both awake to something unspoken, fragile, and dangerously magnetic. I leaned back in my chair, trying not to let my pulse betray me. She did the same against the counter. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. Not a question, not an answer. Just the weight of knowing. And in that quiet, suspended moment, the world outside, her husband my age, social expectations seemed impossibly distant, irrelevant, and almost tender. A soft laugh escaped her, barely audible, like she'd realized the absurdity of the tension and chose to leave it unbroken. My throat went dry, and for the first time I understood that desire could be patient, insistent, and entirely unspoken. And in that charged silence, we both knew, whatever this was, it had only just begun. The afternoon sunlight had faded into a warm, drowsy gold, and still we lingered in the kitchen. I could feel her presence like heat seeping through the air, and I knew she could feel mine too. Our hands brushed again while I reached for the coffee cup she had just set down. Longer this time, intentional. Or maybe neither of us was ready to stop noticing. A sudden ping from her phone made us both jerk. She glanced at the screen, her brow knitting for a split second. A message from her husband. She exhaled slowly, as if forcing herself back into the world she'd stepped away from when she let me in. I tried to look down to give her space, but my pulse was deafening. You didn't answer. I asked, voice too quiet. I didn't, she admitted, thumb hovering over the screen. Some things can wait. Something unspoken passed between us in that pause. Waiting, desire. A dangerous, fleeting permission to stay in this space a little longer. She leaned closer to set the cup down on the table, just a hair's breadth from my chest. I wanted to look anywhere else, but I couldn't. Her warmth brushed me, and for 1 second, Our eyes locked in a silent question, neither dared to speak. "I shouldn't," she murmured, its voice trembling slightly. "Neither should I said, without thinking, because honesty slipped out where caution should have been. Her hand twitched near mine again, and I imagined for the briefest heartbeat pressing my palm to hers. We didn't. We only stared. Closer, so close that I could see the fine lines at the corner of her eyes. The way her lashes dipped when she blinked, the tiniest tremor in her lip. It felt intimate, reckless. Then the door creaked. My heart jumped, and she jerked back slightly. A neighbor's voice floated in the hall, maybe checking on the delivery, maybe just passing by. Neither of us moved for a long moment, frozen in shared relief. Just a trivial interruption, but enough to remind us both of the line we couldn't cross. The world we couldn't ignore. Her gaze returned to me, slower this time. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, anything, and didn't. My throat went dry, and I realized the tension was no longer just between hands or glances. It was in the air, in the slow rise and fall of our chests, in this silent acknowledgement that neither of us had planned for this. Her shoulder brushed mine. Just that. Yet it carried all the weight of near confession, of something we were both desperately resisting and secretly craving. I could feel the pull of her body, the way her warmth seemed to bend the space between us. Maybe we should. I started, then stopped, because words were useless here. The nearness, the quiet electricity, the restrained longing said everything. We weren't brave enough to say. She let out a breath that shivered against my ear as she leaned just slightly closer. Closer than before, testing the boundary. Neither of us moved back, neither of us moved forward. And in that still charged space, the kitchen, ordinary, mundane, sunlit, became a world suspended between what was safe and what we couldn't deny. And somehow, impossibly, even as we tried to resist, we were closer than ever. The air had grown heavier than usual, like it knew it was holding its breath for us. I could feel her presence even before she stepped into the living room, that quiet, measured grace that made the space bend toward her. She paused by the window, and the late afternoon light caught her hair, brushing gold into strands I wanted to touch to tuck behind her ear. "I can't," she whispered, almost too softly for me to hear. Her hands pressed lightly to the windowsill. Not for support, to anchor herself. Or maybe to anchor me. I moved closer. Slowly, my shadow fell across her, but she didn't step back. She had never stepped back in a way that erased the tension. Not really. My fingers itched to brush the hair from her face. Just one careless, deliberate touch, my heart hammering. I resisted watching her inhale sharply when I stopped just short. I shouldn't be feeling this," she said, turning just enough that her shoulder brushed mine. The contact was electric, tiny. Not a touch, not yet, and yet everything. I could feel the warmth of her arm against mine, the quiet rise of her chest. "I can't stop noticing you," I said, voice low, almost a growl against the near silence. My lips hovered near her ear. "Even when I try," she shivered. Maybe from my words, maybe from the nearness, maybe from the impossible pull that neither of us wanted to admit. "I know," she whispered. And then, startlingly, she laughed softly, not light, but tremulous, edged with fear and something raw I wasn't ready to name. We were inches apart now. I could see the faint tremor in her hands, the way her eyelashes dipped when she blinked. She leaned against me. Not fully, not yet surrendering, just enough that her warmth pressed into me. I could feel the slow, measured pull of her body. The way her breath brushed my neck, the subtle perfume that was hers alone. "Why is this so impossible?" she murmured, voice barely audible. A confession, a plea, a warning all at once. "I don't know," I admitted. My hands hovered at her sides, uncertain, trembling. "But it's not impossible to notice." Her eyes met mine, full and steady, vulnerable, guarded, all at once. I wanted to tell her everything, to erase the distance, to take the moment and make it ours. But the world outside, the reality we had promised ourselves to obey, loomed in the corners of the room. "Don't," she breathed. A command disguised as a plea, but her body betrayed her words, pressing ever so slightly against me. Testing boundaries? Daring me? The moment stretched, a single suspended heartbeat that could snap either way. I could feel the warmth of her lips so close it was maddening, intoxicating, impossible. I wanted to close the distance, to taste, to claim the dangerous, beautiful space between us. And then she leaned a fraction closer. My hand itched to tilt her face toward me. My lips hovered, trembling with restraint. And I felt the edge of a decision, the one that would change everything, brush against my consciousness. But before it could fall, before the world tilted, into us completely, a sound shattered the suspended air. Something ordinary, trivial, and perfectly timed. We froze, and in that frozen second, the tension between us was no longer invisible. It was unbearable. Still the distance. Between a breath and a kiss hung in the air, impossibly close. I had just leaned back, trying to catch my breath when her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, fingers tightening around the screen, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, not irritation. Something else, worry. I should tell you something, she said, voice low, uneven. My pulse hitched. Had been waiting for words I didn't know how to ask for, but this wasn't the way I imagined them coming. What is it?" I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. She swallowed, eyes flicking to mine, then down at her hands. He knows you've been here." The room went still, though nothing had moved. My stomach tightened, a mix of fear and something. Darker, a thrill that I couldn't untangle, knows. I asked, though my voice sounded absurdly loud in the quiet. "Yes," she said, finally meeting my gaze again. Her lips pressed together tight. He overheard something. Nothing. Serious, but. She trailed off, hand brushing the edge of the counter. "Now everything feels fragile." Fragile. That was the word. Not forbidden. Not dangerous. Fragile. And yet every nerve in my body lit with awareness of her nearness. The warmth that pressed so close it could burn. I stepped a fraction closer and she didn't step back. Her breath hitched. Our shoulders brushed. Static charge rippled through me, brief and jolting. Her eyes flicked to my lips, then back to mine. The unspoken question still there, despite the risk. I don't want to stop noticing," I admitted, voice rough. Even now. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, brushing the sleeve of my shirt. A contact so slight it could have been accidental, but her eyes told me otherwise. I could feel her pulse under my fingers. Her warmth pressed into me as though she was testing the line between restraint and surrender. "This isn't safe," she said, whispering, more to herself than to me. Her chest rose and fell, quickening. Her eyes lingered on mine, flicking. Away for a breath, then returning. "I don't care about safe," I said, my lips almost brushing her temple as I leaned in. My hand trembled slightly at my side. I could feel her trembling too. The air between us felt tight, almost visible, like it could snap at any second. She stepped back, subtle motion that only barely broke the closeness. Yet her hand stayed near mine, hovering. The risk in that gesture, the pull of wanting, the danger of discovery, made my chest ache. "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted, voice barely audible, almost a confession to herself. "But I can't pretend I don't feel it." Her honesty hit me like a jolt. I could feel her leaning toward me, the faint brush of her breath on my cheek, the small tremble in her hands, desire, fear, guilt, all intertwined. And suddenly nothing felt safe. Nothing was predictable. I swallowed, closing the tiny gap between us without closing it fully. Our bodies hovered, taut with unspoken need. The room silent but heavy with everything neither of us wanted to name. And Then she made a decision, a tiny, irrevocable shift. Leaning just enough that our foreheads almost touched, and I knew in the seconds before it could happen that nothing could remain the same. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had leaned in just to watch us. Her eyes held mine, steady, and in them I saw everything she wasn't saying. Hesitation, fear, longing, a quiet surrender that terrified her. I took a careful step. Closer, her breath hitched, soft, almost imperceptible. The air between us was thick, warm, charged with all the moments we hadn't touched, hadn't admitted, hadn't allowed ourselves to feel. My hand hovered near hers, trembling with restraint and desire both. "I can't. I shouldn't," she whispered. Her voice trembled, fragile but insistently present, a confession and a warning all at once. "I know," I said, softer than I intended, my own restraint fraying. "But I can't stop noticing you. Not now, not ever, really." Her hand lifted slowly, brushing the back of mine. A simple, fleeting touch that carried the weight of everything unspoken. I closed the tiny space between us, careful, cautious, letting the brush of her fingers anchor me, pull me into the gravity of her. We moved closer, almost instinctively, a dance we hadn't rehearsed. My chest brushed hers, the warmth of her shoulder, her neck, the soft scent that clung to her hair. It was dizzying, intoxicating. She tilted her head slightly, not pulling away, and I realized the choice wasn't mine alone. "Do you?" She started, then paused, voice catching. Her lips parted, eyes searching mine, and the quiet desperation in her gaze made my own pulse spike. "Do you even know what this is doing to me?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I leaned just a fraction closer, my voice dropping into a whisper only she could hear. "I know. I feel it too, every second of it." Her chest rose and fell against mine, subtle, uneven, and I could feel the tension in her spine, the tremor in her hands. The world outside rules judgment, expectations dissolved in the gravity of this instant. The only thing that existed was this, her, me. And the space between that could either become a chasm or vanish completely. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice raw, small, and entirely human. The admission broke something open in me. Fear, desire, longing, it all became one messy, beautiful pulse between us. "I'm scared too," I whispered back, closing the final inches. Our foreheads touched lightly, breath mingled, unsteady, shared. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, vibrating with everything we denied ourselves. Everything we'd felt but never named. Her fingers brushed my cheek, tender, deliberate, grounding, and daring all at once. I cupped her hand, pressing it against my chest. For the first time, we let the restraint fall away, if only for a moment. Letting the raw truth of our connection settle between us, no words were needed. No promises, no confessions, just presence. The tension, the attraction, the danger, it all existed, messy and human, and yet somehow complete. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But the understanding was absolute. I knew her, and she knew me. And in that knowledge, fragile, precarious, unstoppable, everything had changed. For the first time, we were fully, irrevocably aware of each other. The house had grown quiet again, but the tension from earlier hadn't left. It lingered in the corners, wrapped in warmth, like sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds. I found her in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, hands folded loosely in her lap. The way she looked up at me made my chest tighten, equal parts relief and lingering desire. "I'm glad you stayed," she said, voice soft, almost shy. Not a confession. Not an invitation, but heavy with meaning. "I wouldn't have gone anywhere," I replied. My words felt too small for the gravity of the night, but they were honest. And that mattered. I sat beside her, careful to respect the delicate balance we'd found. Still, I let my leg brush hers. Small, deliberate, a spark that neither of us tried to hide. She didn't pull away. She never did when it mattered. We sat like that for a long minute, breathing the same air, sharing the quiet. I noticed the faint lines around her eyes, softened by dim light, and the subtle curve of her smile that always arrived without fanfare. She noticed me too. I could tell the way her fingers flexed unconsciously, the gentle tilt of her head. As she followed my movements, I never thought I'd feel this, she admitted after a while. The words came slowly, carefully, like tasting something sweet but dangerous. Not like this, not with someone like you. I turned slightly, toward her, letting our shoulders brush fully this time. Like me. I teased softly, though my voice held no jest. And what exactly is someone like me? She laughed quietly, a sound that melted something rigid inside me. Too young, too reckless, she said, then paused, eyes meeting mine in that way that said, and yet, I echoed, finishing the sentence for her, because we both knew the rest. The rest was in the warmth of her hand brushing mine, in the way she leaned just slightly closer. Not a step back, not a warning, just presence. I reached out then, slowly, deliberately, and intertwined my fingers with hers. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She let them stay together, small but significant, like a promise neither of us could articulate. I leaned my forehead to hers. A soft, grounding touch. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second, and in that simple act, the world outside, the age gap, the judgment, the fear, all fell away. Only this remained. Only us. She exhaled slowly. I think I've been waiting for this. Without even knowing, I've been waiting too, I said, voice low, rough with everything I hadn't said before. We stayed like that, foreheads pressed, hands entwined, bodies close, but not needing more. Every hesitation, every fear, every reckless thought from before had led to this, a shared moment of understanding, messy and human, and yet wholly ours. The tension didn't vanish. Desire didn't fade, but it softened into warmth, into recognition, into something sustainable, something real. And as the evening light fell across the room, painting us in gold, I realized we had crossed the impossible line, not with a dramatic kiss or a stolen secret, but with presence, honesty, and shared breath. Finally, I didn't want to be anywhere else. We didn't need more. We had each other.